I swear, I thought it was just another boring day at the bank. People in suits, tired cashiers, and that weird smell of coffee mixed with printer ink. But then, I saw her. An old woman. Small, frail, but with these sharp, determined eyes. She clutched an envelope like it was her lifeline, standing in line while people huffed impatiently behind her. I didn't know her story yet. I didn't know what she was about to go through. And I definitely didn't know that a world-famous movie star was about to turn this entire bank into a courtroom, but it all started with her voice. "Excuse me, miss. I think there's been a mistake with my account." The teller barely glanced up. A young woman with perfectly manicured nails tapping on her keyboard, her expression unreadable. "Name?" "Maggie Thompson," the old woman said, her voice shaking. The teller sighed. That kind of sigh. The kind that says, "Ugh, here we go again." I wasn't the only one who noticed. A few people in line exchanged glances. They already knew how this was going to go. "Look, ma'am, these fees are standard," the teller, her name tag said Brittany, muttered, barely looking at Maggie. "There's nothing we can do." Maggie clutched her envelope tighter. "But I've never had these fees before. My account has been the same for years." "Like I said," Brittany sighed again, louder this time. "It's in the policy. You should have read it." A few people in line shifted uncomfortably. Maggie looked around, as if searching for someone who'd back her up. Nobody did. She took a shaky breath. "I just want to understand why," and that's when he showed up, Todd Murphy. The branch manager, tall, sharp suit, and an ego so big it barely fit in the room. "Ma'am," he said, crossing his arms. "Is there a problem here?" Maggie opened her mouth, then closed it. I think my account has been charged incorrectly. I just want someone to take a look." Todd's smile was all business. "Mrs. Thompson, if there was a mistake, it's likely on your end." Maggie blinked. "Excuse me?" Todd leaned in just a bit, lowering his voice like he was doing her a favor. "These fees only apply to accounts that don't meet our minimum balance requirements. Maybe you didn't notice, but I have always had the same balance," Maggie interrupted. Her hands were trembling, but her voice was steady. "I've never had a problem until now." Todd's smile didn't waver. "But I saw it." The way his eyes flickered, just for a second. He knew, and he wasn't about to admit it. "Well," he said, brushing imaginary dust off his sleeve. "Maybe this bank isn't the right place for you." The words landed like a slap. The bank fell silent. Even the people waiting in line seemed frozen in place. Maggie took a step back. Her lips parted like she wanted to say something, but the humiliation was too much. She just stood there, her face turning red, her hands gripping that envelope like it was the only thing holding her together. And that's when a voice cut through the silence. A calm, steady voice. "Why are you speaking to her like that?" Heads turned. At first, he looked ordinary. Just another customer in a baseball cap, standing near the back. But when he took a step forward, the light caught his face and then someone whispered, "Holy sh*T, that's Keanu Reeves." The bank held its breath. Todd blinked. Brittany's mouth dropped open. Keanu took another step forward, his hands in his pockets, his expression unreadable. "It doesn't matter who I am," he said, his voice low and firm. "What matters is how you're treating her." And just like that, everything changed. For a moment, nobody moved. Todd Murphy, the smug bank manager, stood there like he had just been slapped. Brittany, the teller, shifted uncomfortably, eyes darting between her boss and the man who had just spoken. And Maggie. Maggie just looked confused, like she couldn't believe someone, let alone Keanu Reeves, was stepping in for her. Todd cleared his throat. "Mr. Reeves, Keanu held up a hand. Just a small gesture, but it shut Todd up immediately. The entire bank was watching now. Even the people who had been impatiently waiting in line were suddenly glued to the scene, some pulling out their phones like they could sense something was about to go down. Keanu's voice was calm, but there was something about it, something controlled, something that made everyone in the room feel like they were standing on thin ice. "I asked you a question," he said. "Why are you speaking to her like that?" Todd's jaw clenched. "Sir, this is a private matter between the bank and one of our customers." Keanu let out a short, humorless laugh. "Really? Because it looks to me like you're humiliating her over a few dollars." Todd's face turned red. "That's not what's happening here." Keanu tilted his head. "No?" He turned to Maggie. "Ma'am, did you get a proper explanation for these charges?" Maggie hesitated, her voice barely above a whisper. "No, they just told me it was in the policy." Keanu turned back to Todd. "So, let's make sure I understand this. You're charging her for something she didn't agree to, refusing to explain it properly, and now telling her to take her business elsewhere?" Todd's lip twitched. "It's because she doesn't have enough money, right?" Keanu interrupted, his voice still steady but sharp. "That's what you're saying?" Todd swallowed hard. "That's when Keanu did something nobody expected. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a black leather wallet, and without breaking eye contact with Todd, slapped it down on the counter. The sound echoed through the dead-silent bank. The entire room was holding its breath. Keanu slowly unzipped the wallet, pulled out a platinum credit card, and placed it on the counter. "Since this is about money," he said, "I'll cover whatever she supposedly owes." Maggie gasped. "No, I don't need." Keanu held up a hand again, gently, before turning back to Todd. "There," he said. "Problem solved." Todd's face was burning red now. He was out of excuses. Brittany, the teller, looked like she wanted to shrink into the floor. The security guard by the door actually adjusted his stance, as if wondering if he'd have to escort the branch manager out instead of some random customer. Todd's eyes flickered toward the people in line. They weren't just watching anymore. They were waiting. Someone muttered, "Damn, I want to see how this ends." Todd forced a laugh. "That's very generous of you, Mr. Reeves, but bank policies." Keanu cut him off again. "You seem to like talking about policies." He tapped the counter. "So let's talk about them. Let's see where in your policies it says you can triple someone's fees without notifying them." Todd stiffened. Keanu turned to Brittany. "Do you have a copy of that policy?" Brittany's fingers hovered over the keyboard. Because if you don't," Keanu said, his voice dropping to something dangerously calm, "then I'd say this looks a lot like theft." A murmur rippled through the bank. Todd looked like he was ready to explode. He spun toward Brittany. "Pull up her account." Brittany's hands were shaking as she typed. The screen flickered, and then, she froze. A strange look crossed her face. Confusion. Panic. Todd leaned over. "What is it?" Brittany swallowed. "Sir, these fees, they weren't supposed to be applied." The room went still. Todd blinked. "What?" Brittany hesitated. They only appear in flagged accounts. Like accounts under investigation." She clicked a few buttons. "But Mrs. Thompson's account wasn't flagged." Keanu's eyes narrowed. "So, what you're saying is, this wasn't a mistake?" Brittany paled. I don't know. It looks like." She stopped because Todd had just kicked her. Under the counter. It was small. Subtle. But Keanu saw it. "I saw it, and so did half the people watching." Brittany flinched. Her mouth opened like she was about to say something, but then, she shut up. That's when I realized, Todd wasn't just a jerk. He was hiding something. Keanu noticed too. He turned his full attention to Todd, stepping forward slightly, his voice lowering. "What exactly is going on here?" Todd's Adam's apple bobbed. "Nothing. Just a technical error." Keanu stared at him. 1 beat, 2 beats, then Keanu did something insane. He reached across the counter, and turned the computer screen toward him. Brittany yelped. Todd lunged to stop him, but, too late. Keanu's eyes flickered across the screen, scanning line after line of numbers. Then he saw it, the fees weren't random, they were targeted, account after account. Mostly elderly customers just like Maggie. Keanu slowly looked up. "You're running a scam." Todd went pale, Brittany visibly recoiled, and just like that, everything snapped. People in the bank started whispering. One woman gasped. "Wait, I got those charges too." A man in the back frowned. "Yeah, me too." "What the hell?" Todd backed up. Keanu stepped forward. "You've been stealing from elderly customers. Taking their money, betting they wouldn't notice, wouldn't fight back." He clenched his jaw. "But you made one mistake." Todd stumbled. What?" Keanu leaned in. "You did it in front of me." For the first time, Todd panicked. He turned toward the security guard. You need to escort him out. Right now." The guard didn't move. He crossed his arms. "No." Todd froze. "What?" The guard shrugged. "I'm not kicking out Keanu Reeves." And that's when all hell broke loose. The moment the security guard refused to kick Keanu out, the entire bank shifted. Todd Murphy's face turned an unnatural shade of red. His forehead glistened with sweat, his jaw clenched so tight I thought his teeth might crack. Brittany, the terrified teller, sat frozen like a deer in headlights, staring at the computer screen that had just exposed everything. And Keanu just stood there, calm as ever, hands in his pockets, like he had all the time in the world. The silence stretched. Then, somewhere in the back, "I want to check my account." A woman stepped forward, phone in hand. Her tone wasn't a request. It was a demand. Todd flinched. "Ma'am, there's no, I want to check mine too." A second voice, then a third, then a fourth. It was like a switch had flipped. The whole bank, customers who had been minding their own business just minutes ago, suddenly realized they might be victims too, and they weren't about to let it slide. Todd raised his hands. "Everyone, please, I got those fees too," a man near the window called out. He jabbed a finger toward Todd. "You've been robbing us." No, Todd stammered. "This is all, open the terminals," someone else shouted. That's when the panic set in. Todd spun around. "Brittany, shut down the system. Now." Brittany's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She was shaking, sweat pooling at her hairline. Keanu stepped forward. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Brittany's hands jerked back like she had just touched fire. Todd whirled toward Keanu, eyes wild. "You don't run this bank, you can't just." Keanu tilted his head. "No, but I do have 4 million Instagram followers who'd love to see this in real time." Todd's soul left his body. Keanu raised his phone, already recording, the camera locked onto Todd's sweaty, panicked face. "Go ahead," Keanu said smoothly. "Tell them how it's all just a technical error." Brittany made a strangled noise. Todd took a shaky step backward. You can't just film," Keanu smiled. "I'm not filming." Todd blinked. Keanu turned the phone toward him. The screen was open to Instagram Live and the viewer count, 98,000 and climbing. Todd made a horrific sound, half gasp, half wheeze. "Turn it off." Keanu's expression didn't change. "No," and that's when the comments started flooding in. Eyes, did this man just get caught committing fraud live? "Fire Keanu for president, let's go skull his face LMAO, he knows he's SEREWED." The bank exploded into chaos. Customers demanded their accounts be checked. The employees looked ready to jump ship. Brittany looked like she might actually pass out. Todd snapped, "That's IT," he roared. He turned to the security guard. "Call the police." And this, right here, was the best part. The security guard tilted his head. "You sure about that?" Todd froze. "What?" The guard folded his arms. "Because once they get here, they're gonna wanna see those records." He nodded toward the screen, still flashing with proof of the scam. You really want to bring the cops into this? Todd's face fell apart and then, the doors swung open. Two men stepped inside, suits, badges, serious expressions. Todd choked. Corporate fraud investigators, sent by the bank's regional office, and guess who tipped them off? Maggie, sweet, soft-spoken, smarter than all of us. Maggie, she had called the bank's headquarters the moment she realized she wasn't the only victim. And guess what? They had already been suspicious of Todd. One of the men pulled out a tablet. Mr. Murphy? Todd barely nodded. The man turned the screen toward him. Care to explain why we're seeing over 200 fraudulent charges connected to your login credentials? Todd's knees almost gave out. Brittany grabbed her mouth. Keanu? Keanu just smiled. You might want to think carefully about your answer, he said. Because that's a lot of people who'd love to hear it. He tilted his phone, showing the live stream, now at 300,000 viewers. Todd collapsed into a chair. It was over. The investigators dragged Todd into a back room. The security guard locked the doors behind them. Brittany, looking absolutely wrecked, turned to Maggie with tears in her eyes. I'm so sorry, she whispered. Maggie exhaled. I just want my money back. Keanu turned to the investigators. That'll be happening, right? The man in charge nodded. Every single customer affected will be reimbursed. A wave of relief swept through the room and then, just because Keanu Reeves is Keanu freaking Reeves, he pulled out his checkbook and wrote a personal donation for any elderly customers who had suffered beyond just bank fees. Call it an inconvenience fee, he said, handing the check to Maggie. Maggie stared. This is too much. Keanu winked. You'll pay it forward. The bank erupted into applause. As Keanu turned to leave, the security guard clapped him on the shoulder. That was the best damn thing I've seen in my life. Keanu just chuckled. Always happy to help. And with that, he strolled out the door, like a goddamn legend. 1 week later, the story made national news. Todd Murphy? Fired. Investigated. Facing serious legal charges. The bank? Forced to publicly apologize and reimburse every single victim. Maggie? Got back every penny. And then some. And Keanu? Keanu went viral. The clip of him saying, "You did it in front of me," got 10 million views overnight. And the best part, when someone asked him about it in an interview, Keanu just smiled and said, "Everyone deserves respect." Simple as that. It didn't take long for Todd Murphy's career, and life, to fall apart. The day after his scam was exposed, his face was plastered everywhere. News headlines. Social media. Even a late-night talk show host cracked a joke about him. Imagine robbing elderly customers and then getting caught by John Wick himself. That's like stealing candy from a baby and getting drop-kicked by Batman. By the time Todd was released from questioning, he had lost everything. The bank's corporate office fired him on the spot. His personal accounts? Frozen for investigation. His car? Repossessed. His house? Under review for assets linked to the fraud. And as for Brittany, the nervous teller? She quit before she could be fired. Word on the street was that she'd been covering for Todd out of fear, but once the truth came out, she didn't want to be anywhere near the mess. The public ate it up. Memes flooded the internet. Fire, get yourself a friend who'll stand up for you like Keanu Reeves stood up for that old lady. Face with tears of joy. Todd Murphy's net worth just dropped faster than my bank balance after payday. Skull, bro got ratioed by the Matrix. But while the world was busy dragging Todd into oblivion, Keanu had already moved on. 1 month later. A quiet cafe in New York City. The cafe wasn't anything fancy. Just a small, cozy place tucked between two bookstores. The kind of spot where people went to escape the world for a little while. Keanu sat at a corner table, stirring his coffee, dressed in his usual low-key outfit, jeans, boots, and a black hoodie. He wasn't alone. Across from him sat Maggie Thompson. She looked different. Still the same kind woman from that day in the bank, but something had changed. There was a lightness to her. A confidence. You didn't have to do all that, she said, shaking her head. Keanu smiled, sipping his coffee. You would have done the same for me. Maggie chuckled. Not sure I could have pulled off the whole, internationally beloved action star saves the day thing. Keanu grinned. It's all about timing. Maggie's smile softened. Seriously, though. Thank you. She pulled something out of her bag and slid it across the table. A check. Keanu glanced down at it. Then back at her. It's the money you gave me, Maggie said. Plus a little extra. I didn't need it in the end. The bank compensated me and the others pretty well. Keanu didn't take the check, Maggie sighed. I knew you'd say that. She pulled out a second check, this one already signed over to a charity. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Veterans Assistance? Maggie nodded. I figured you'd like that one. A slow smile spread across Keanu's face. You figured right. He lifted his coffee mug in a silent toast. Maggie lifted hers, too, and just like that, they shared a quiet moment, two unlikely friends brought together by one ridiculous, unbelievable day. Maggie took a sip, then smirked. You know, she mused, I bet some people still think this whole thing was fake. Keanu chuckled. Let them. Maggie grinned. What do you think Todd's doing right now? Keanu shrugged. Hopefully learning something. Meanwhile, in a crappy apartment across town, Todd Murphy sat on his lumpy couch, scrolling through his phone in horror. His name was still trending. Hashtag Todd the Scammer was now an official hashtag. Someone had even started a GoFundMe titled Help Todd Get a Job, if anyone will hire him. Todd groaned, rubbing his face. How the hell had his life turned into this? Then, just when he thought it couldn't get any worse, his phone buzzed. A notification. An email from Keanu Reeves. Todd stared. His hands were sweaty as he clicked it open. Subject: Hope you're learning something. Hey Todd, life has a funny way of teaching lessons. Hope you're paying attention, best. Keanu. Todd's stomach dropped. He slammed his laptop shut, and for the first time since everything fell apart, he felt truly afraid. Epilogue: 1 year later, the bank scandal became a case study in corporate fraud prevention. Maggie? She used her compensation money to start a legal assistance fund for elderly victims of financial fraud. She called it the Reeves Initiative. And Keanu went back to doing what he always did, making movies, living life, and being a legend. But every once in a while, when people asked about that day in the bank, he would just smile and say, I was just in the right place at the right time. And that was that point. 1 year later, a hotel lobby in Los Angeles. Keanu wasn't looking for trouble. He had just wrapped up a long day on set, grabbed a coffee from a small shop nearby, and stepped into the lobby of his hotel. Just a quiet night. No cameras, no crowds. Just a normal guy looking for an elevator. But the universe had other plans, because sitting alone in the corner of the lobby, hunched over a laptop, was a man Keanu hadn't seen in a year. Todd Murphy. Keanu slowed to a stop. Todd looked rough. His once expensive suits had been replaced with a wrinkled button-up and jeans that had seen better days. His hair was a little thinner, his face a little more tired, and on his laptop screen, a job application. Keanu tilted his head. Todd froze. He knew that voice. Slowly, hesitantly, he looked up. The second his eyes locked onto Keanu's face, his entire soul left his body. His hands jerked away from the keyboard like he'd been caught committing another crime. His mouth opened and closed a few times, but no sound came out. Keanu took a sip of his coffee. Todd looked around, like maybe this was some kind of prank. Maybe a hidden camera show. But no, there was no one else watching, just him and Keanu. A man he had wronged. A man he had been humiliated by. A man who had completely and utterly ruined his life, just by telling the truth. Keanu took a few steps forward. He didn't sit down, just rested a hand on the back of the empty chair across from Todd. Todd swallowed hard. Keanu lifted a finger. Todd shut up immediately. Then, Keanu pulled out his own phone. Todd flinched. You're not. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Todd panicked. You're not gonna record this, are you? Keanu let the question hang in the air, then he sighed and put his phone back in his pocket. No. Todd let out a breath of relief. For a long moment, Neither of them spoke. Then, Keanu nodded toward the laptop. Applying for a job? Todd hesitated, then slowly nodded. Yeah. Keanu smirked. Bet you're not listing bank fraud under special skills. Todd visibly cringed. Look, Keanu tilted his head. What are you even qualified for? Scamming people? Todd clenched his fists. I'm trying to start over, okay? Keanu just watched him. Todd sighed, rubbing his face. I lost everything. My house. My car. My retirement. Even my reputation. No one wants to hire me. He laughed bitterly. Hell, I applied to a coffee shop last week and the manager recognized me from that damn video. Keanu sipped his coffee. Did you get the job? Todd scoffed. No, Keanu set his drink down. Good. Todd froze, his eyes snapped up. Excuse me? Keanu crossed his arms. You don't deserve an easy way out. Todd's jaw tightened. You think I don't know that? Keanu studied him. I don't know, Todd. Do you? Todd flinched at the tone. Keanu leaned on the chair, voice calm but firm. You spent years taking advantage of people who couldn't fight back. You ruined hundreds of lives, and only stopped because you got caught. Todd's face burned. Keanu shook his head. You don't just start over from that. You earn your way back. Todd scoffed. Yeah? And how the hell am I supposed to do that? Keanu took another sip of coffee, thinking. Then, he pulled something from his jacket. A business card. Todd's brow furrowed as Keanu tossed it onto the table. Todd hesitated. Then, slowly, he picked it up. He read it once. Then twice. Then his hand started shaking. A name. A phone number. And one sentence printed at the bottom: Community Outreach and Financial Recovery Services. Todd's breath hitched. This is, Keanu nodded. They help people who've been financially scammed get back on their feet. Todd's mouth was dry. Why are you giving this to me? Keanu's eyes hardened. Because they're looking for volunteers. Todd's stomach dropped, his fingers clenched the card. You want me to? I don't want anything, Keanu interrupted. I'm giving you a choice. Todd swallowed. Keanu straightened up. You want to fix your reputation? Fix yourself. Give back. Help the same kind of people you used to steal from. Todd looked at the card again, then back at Keanu. His expression was unreadable. His body tense. Keanu didn't break eye contact. Then, after a long silence, he picked up his coffee, turned away, and walked toward the elevator. Todd stared after him. He looked at the card in his hands, then at his laptop screen. The job application suddenly felt pathetic. His throat tightened, and after a long moment, Todd reached into his pocket, pulled out his phone and dialed the number. 6 months later, a small office in downtown Lathe. Office wasn't big. Just a few desks, some second-hand chairs, and a coffee machine that only worked half the time. Todd Murphy sat behind a desk, organizing case files. He didn't make much money here. Barely enough to cover rent, but every day, he helped people who had lost their savings. People who had been scammed, people like Maggie. And for the first time in his life, Todd Murphy was actually doing something good. One afternoon, as he finished up paperwork, his phone buzzed. A text, from an unknown number. Todd frowned and opened it. Unknown. Still volunteering? Todd blinked. He hesitated. Then typed back, Todd, yeah. A moment passed, then, unknown. Good. Todd stared, then, slowly, a tiny smirk crossed his lips. Because he didn't need a name to know exactly who had sent it. He put his phone down, took a deep breath, and got back to work.